Welcome to Grace Fellowship Baptist Church Wednesday evening Bible study for Wednesday, October 23rd, 2024. We are in the book of 2 Kings in the middle of chapter 23. Our passage starts in verse 26. Because it starts with nevertheless, I'm going to introduce it with the first three verses of chapter 23. But first, I was asked an interesting question this week, and I know I've answered it to the people who show up on Wednesday night. The reason I do not start with prayer is I do my praying about what I'm teaching before I get on camera. Y'all don't get to see that. It very often is longer than I actually record. You don't need to see a prayer. The reason I start with Scripture after the title is you're hearing from God first. Scripture is God's Word. And so you're going to hear from God first, not Frank. After I've read, I begin to interpret it for you and expound on it, and so then you hear from Frank and you hear the teaching, and then I pray at the end. That helps summarize it and bring it together. And then I put a tag on the end. That's the general layout of the lessons. That helps you understand them. Chapter 23, verse 1. Then the king called together all the elders of Judah and Jerusalem. He went up to the temple of the Lord with the men of Judah, the people of Jerusalem, the priests, and the prophets, all the people from the least to the greatest. He read in their hearing all the words of the book of the covenant which had been found in the temple of the Lord. The king stood by the pillar and renewed the covenant in the presence of the Lord, to follow the Lord and keep his commands, regulations, and decrees with all his heart and with all his soul, thus confirming the words of the covenant written in this book. Then all the people pledged themselves to the covenant. And between verse 4 and verse 25 tells about how he used his political influence to achieve what he promised that day, standing in the temple. Now verse 26. Nevertheless, the Lord did not turn away from the heat of his fierce anger, which burned against Judah because of all that Manasseh had done to provoke him to anger. So the Lord said, I will remove Judah also from my presence, as I removed Israel, and I will reject Jerusalem, the city I chose, and this temple, about which I said, there shall my name be. As for the other events of Josiah's reign and all he did, are they not written in the books of the annals of the kings of Judah? So, God was not mollified by Josiah's reform. This week, in my personal reading, I read the book of Zephaniah. It's one of the minor prophets. He's one of the minor prophets. He is the man that is credited with convincing Josiah to worship Yahweh. And he is prophesying in a time of economic prosperity, political prosperity, but that prosperity is brought about by something we feel today in America. It is the elites of this Judean society were oppressing everybody else and getting a disproportionate share of the income, the wealth of the country, and essentially everybody else was being cheated. So Zephaniah preaches against that. He preaches against their worship of false gods, and he depends upon God. And apparently that touched Josiah's heart, that led to everything we've dealt with Josiah. And But on the surface it looks really good, but it's apparently a very superficial revival. Some people were probably very genuine, and they turned from wicked ways and worshipped Yahweh and obeyed the law, and Josiah was encouraging that. But the problem is Josiah's one man, and he's king, he's very influential, but you can't enforce the heart. He can enforce the outward thing. The thing is, he doesn't have a good enough system of control over the country to ferret out every little pocket, and it's a superficial reform of the country. Yeah, they stood up in the temple and they promised Josiah and they promised God they would, but a lot of them leave there and quickly fall away. Yeah, he wipes out all the foreign priests. He wipes out all the high places. He wipes out all the altars. He takes down all the Asherah poles. He destroys all the foreign temples, etc., etc., etc. And on the surface, the land looks like they only worship Yahweh. But we know from what happens when he dies and what his sons do and his grandson that ruled, that the people are not reformed. They're superficially worshiping Yahweh. And we know the priests were not reformed. They were superficially worshiping Yahweh to keep their king happy. As soon as there's a new king, they come back to all the old practices that they had been doing. Their hearts did not change, and they were leading the people into sin. And when the spiritual leadership becomes corrupt, the country will become corrupt. And I can say that's true here in America today. Very few highly successful, highly visible Christian preachers preach the gospel the way God wants it. Prosperity gospel, which is a false gospel, is prominent, but honestly, there's other strains, there's other things. Some of the excesses of the charismatic movement probably actually hold more people's hearts, and a lot of the people will worship in that way. I'll say this about the charismatic movement, even in their more or the least biblical forms that are the most popular, that aren't prosperity gospel, they still believe in salvation by faith, and so God can still use them and does use them, but they twist the gospel and the Christian life in subtle ways. And it's hard to sit here and explain it in a short explanation. It takes a long part of teaching to explain what they are actually believing and saying and why that's wrong, and then why the truth is what it is. I appreciate Grace Fellowship Baptist Church because Oscar leads to the truth. He teaches to the truth. Bill leads to the truth. He teaches to the truth. Dale leads to the truth, and he teaches the truth. And that makes it easy for me to also teach to the truth and lead to the truth. And we're all in agreement. And it's not a trivial thing. And I think because we're following God, as far as I can tell, correctly, I'm sure that we're human beings. We have failings. We're not perfect. Therefore, we're not leading perfectly. I'm not saying that we are, but we have the big things right, and God is blessing us. I full well believe because of that. But He's not also having us bust out at the seams. We're not fixing to become a mega church in 12 months or anything. We're not fixing to have that kind of phenomenal growth. In 10 years, if we're a mega church, I personally will be very surprised. God has not laid that foundation yet. I think if we continue this for 2 or 3 generations, we could get there. But there's a lot of ifs along the way. You notice I said generations. So we're going to have to teach it to the next generation. They're going to have to obey it and teach it. And, it's going to take us time to get there. We're at the beginning. There's a lot of growth to happen. But, being correct, God will have us endure. Yeah, things look perilous right now. If you look at our finances, it is unclear how we've survived the last 10 years and how we're making it right now. On paper, it doesn't look like it should have worked. But God wanted to preserve us, so He has. Our revival, I think, is real. We still need to teach our new members and have them obey God and understand God well and theology well and practice well and attitude well. So we still have a big work with our new members. But I think God is working among us. God was working through Josiah, but it was only affecting a certain thin veneer of the society, and much of the leadership of society was not genuinely believing. And that caused Josiah's reform to only last as long as he lived. And everything else he did is recorded in the book that we don't have, the Annals of the Kings of Judah. Verse 29. While Josiah was king, Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, went up to the Euphrates River to help the king of Assyria. King Josiah marched out to meet him in battle, but Necho faced him and killed him at Megiddo. Josiah's servants brought his body in a chariot from Megiddo to Jerusalem and buried him in his own tomb. And the people of the land took Jehoahaz, son of Josiah, and anointed him and made him king in the place of his father. Now, how did Josiah die? This sounds like he's being foolish. I mean, he has an army of at most 250,000 men. King or Pharaoh Necho has approximately 1 million to 1.5 million man army. He's marching out of Egypt. He has just thrown off the Ethiopians. His troops are battle hardened. They understand war, and he's going to help the empire of the day that is begun to be in decline, but he needs politically. And the battle where he helps Assyria, the king of Assyria, is called Carchemish. It is a pivotal battle in world history. They face Nebuchadnezzar, general of the army of Babylon. He becomes King Nebuchadnezzar a few weeks after winning this battle. His father is king of Babylon, and will die from old age soon after he gets back, and he will become king from winning this battle. The battle shapes the Middle East in ways we still feel today. It begins the ascendancy of the Western culture. If the Assyrians and Egypt had won, and the Babylonians lost, our world would still probably be dominated by Middle Eastern culture. The age of exploration would have never happened. Rome would have probably been an empire on the European continent. It would have never got into the Middle East. It would have never conquered Egypt. It would have never gotten the breadbasket both of those represent that fed its troops to conquer. It may not have gotten north of the Alps. It may not have gotten into Gaul. The Battle of Carchemish is that important. Greece would have never been able to conquer all it did. The Babylonians had as their allies the Medes and the Scythians. The Scythians, by the way, are the ancestors of the Rus people. The Medes are the ancestors of two people that are still important in the Middle East today. It's kind of interesting. The Yeshitis, who are, they directly say their ancestors, their ancestors were the Medes. They still believe a variant of the Medish religion that was in then. They have never adopted Islam. And they are still looking for their homeland. And that's kind of important because they are one of four people groups in the world that for centuries and millennia have kept their identity without a homeland. The Jews are the most prominent. They, the Romani, what we call gypsies. And the other group is the other group of Medes. And they're prominent in the Middle East today. Turkey wants to suppress them because their classical homeland is part of Turkey. Iran and Iraq want to suppress them because part of their traditional homeland is from those two countries. They are allies of the United States in the Middle East. And they have persisted since the days of the defeat of the Mede Empire as their own people without a homeland. And they're still trying to get their homeland. Of course, 2 weeks ago we talked about the origin of the Medes that rise up and influence the world history, and how that's where the Israelites that were taken out of Israel by the Assyrians were settled. And so the Medes are half Israelite. I think that's interesting. Anyway, in the Battle of Carchemish, it's roughly 3 million men in battle. And Babylon is badly outnumbered on the battlefield. They have well-trained troops from both empires facing them, the Egyptians and the Assyrians. They're battle-hardened. They have the Assyrians have the home field advantage. It is part of their empire. They know the territory well. Babylon does know the territory, but is not. They're not that familiar with it. They have lots of people that have been there, but they don't know it intimately the way the Assyrians do. The Egyptians have superior technology to both of the other groups. And so, in human terms, the Assyrian-Egyptian alliance should be the one that wins. And God is trying to prevent that from happening. And he has to thin the Egyptians down. They did not ask Judah permission to march through Judah's territory. And Josiah was righteous to go oppose them and say, no, you don't have permission, you cannot pass, and put his army in the way. And he had less than 250,000 men. They lost about 10,000 to 15,000 men, so they didn't lose a major chunk of their army. They killed over 100,000, possibly as many as 150,000 Egyptians. And some historians have said the Babylonians won by less than 8,000 soldiers. So it's a very even battle, even though it was a very bloody battle in that the Assyrians did not exist after this battle. Their army was wiped out to a man. The king was killed. There was no empire after that. The Babylonians took a year and a half to raise another army. The Egyptians took 2 years, but they never leave the northern border of Egypt again until they face Alexander the Great. It destroys them at the moment they were fixing to start breaking out and making an empire again, and it destroys them so they are not a conquering empire. Before they manage to raise their army, they have to deal with the Libyans who revolted. They had to, after they raised the army, deal with the Ethiopians who were trying to reconquer them, because Necho was the pharaoh that overthrew the Ethiopians. And he thought he was ascendant. He had just defeated the largest empire that he faced, and he was going to help the Assyrians, who apparently helped him some, and benefit them, and therefore make political inroads and gain a whole bunch of territory. And he got defeated. And he faced rebellion, and then the Ethiopians saw a weakness, and they tried to reconquer. He manages to defeat them and actually conquer Ethiopia, but it takes him several years to conquer Ethiopia and get it all under his administration. They were still a strong people, and he never ever leaves the northern boundary, and his descendants do not. And the next time Egypt is fixing to leave Egypt and go become an empire again, they leave to go conquer to the north, and they meet Alexander the Great, who defeats them and goes in and wipes them out, takes all of Egypt and Ethiopia and Libya for his own. So what Jeremiah the prophet says is that Egypt will never ever again be a empire, a strong nation. They will never ever leave Egypt again, becomes literally true. And their defeat at Carchemish is that pivotal battle. And they lost it partly because they didn't ask Judah for permission to march through their land. They didn't pay a tribute to Judah. If they had done their politics, they would have kept their army. They wouldn't have been defeated. Josiah actually does an amazing job. He just happens to die. And I think that's even part of God's work. God worked through him to... The Egyptians say they won the battle because they killed Josiah. But they lost in that it was a very lopsided battle. And they barely made a dent in the Judean army. And Josiah's sons that become king after him raise a bigger army because they see how the world influence is, and they know they have to build it up. But they are not the men their dad was. But it weakens the Egyptians enough they lose. And they have to stay in Egypt, and they don't leave Egypt again. The Babylonians finished them off. The Babylonians almost lost that battle, but they need to be the people that are ascendant. And so God has them fail to do their politics. And since nominally Judah's free from Assyria, but they're still in the area that's under Assyrian influence. It should have been a trivial matter to get permission because, hey, these are the allies to the Assyrians, but no, Necho thinks that he doesn't need to ask permission, so he doesn't, and Josiah righteously says, nope, you can't go through my territory. And the Egyptians do go through, and but there's not an army marching back. Their army is wiped out enough that when it comes back, they pay the tribute and come through, slinking through, because they know they can't face Judah again. That they have fewer people left than they lost in battle to Judah last time, and they know they did not put a big dent in that army. Yeah, they killed the king, but they're not willing to risk that battle. They may not have anybody left. It's a pivotal point in history. After that, Babylon is ascendant. Egypt's pinned in Egypt. The Assyrians are no more. And the Babylonians are the ascendant empire, and their conquering king is on the throne. He was the conquering general, and he will stay the general of the Babylonian army for most of his reign. And he was the most successful conquering king until you get to Alexander the Great, who has still not been surpassed. So he's number 2 in the world as far as kings that conquered and made an empire. And he almost lost it if it hadn't been for Josiah. So Josiah's sacrifice is what God needed to make the world into what it is today. It sets up the Babylonians, it sets up the Greeks, it sets up the Romans, so that in the fullness of time, Jesus can come and dwell on earth and die an atoning sacrifice to forgive sin. It's that important. And the other thing it does is it takes Josiah, a righteous man, off the throne and puts his unrighteous son on the throne. Verse 31. Jehoahaz was 23 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 3 months. His mother's name was Hamutal, daughter of Jeremiah. She was from Libnah. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, just as his fathers had done. I'm going to pause there. Clearly 3 months, he's not much of a king. His mother was daughter of Jeremiah. And we, as 21st century Christians, jump to the conclusion, oh, this was Jeremiah the prophet. No, it's not. Jeremiah the prophet was from Anathoth. He never married. He never had children. This is not his daughter. In fact, Jeremiah the prophet is alive at this point in time, but not well publicly known yet. He's probably prophesying. He is a priest, and he's probably trying to continue the reform of Josiah and see people obey God. God has called him, but he's not well known yet. It's under the kings that follow this that he gets to be known, and his ministry, and he ministers from this time through the end of Judah. Jeremiah was apparently a decently common name. We don't know who this man was, but from Libnah. So, this is not the prophet we know. That much we're sure. But remember that name, Hamutal. Next week we're going to get back to her. Right now, she's just the king. She's just one of the wives of Josiah. She actually has several sons, and more than one of them become king. Jehoahaz is not the oldest son. He's 23 years old. Joash was 39 when he died. So, Joash was 16 when he had Jehoahaz. He's already king. So, that's not a bad age if you're already king to be having children in that day and time. He was already viewed as an adult. Him being married to her and having children is not unprecedented. I think it's interesting that the people of the land chose Jehoahaz, because actually Necho, when he comes through the land, he deposes him and puts his older brother on the throne, who's 2 years older. But he's evil. He does everything that the kings before Josiah did. And so he begins the counter-reform and pulling people off. And he's evil to the people of the land. So he's following in the footsteps of Manasseh. And the prophets are going to decry that because it's Manasseh. And Manasseh gets in Judah the same kind of name that Ahab did in Israel. And, his sins are what the prophets decry, because all the kings other than Josiah followed them. Verse 33. Pharaoh Necho put him in chains in Riblah in the land of Hamath, so that he might not reign in Jerusalem. And he imposed on Judah a levy of 100 talents of silver and a talent of gold. Pharaoh Necho made Eliakim, son of Josiah, king in place of his father Josiah, and changed Eliakim's name to Jehoiakim. He took Jehoahaz and carried him off to Egypt, and there he died. Jehoiakim paid Pharaoh Necho the silver and gold he demanded. In order to do so, he taxed the land and exacted the silver and gold from the people of the land according to their assessments. So King Necho comes back through Judah. He faces a brand new untested king who goes out to oppose him. They don't fight a battle. King Necho pays a sum to Jehoahaz for the right to move through the land, but then he turns around and arrests Jehoahaz and puts his older brother on the throne and changes the brother's name. He's a deceitful man, but he's also defeated. He gets more tribute from Eliakim or Jehoiakim, the name he gives him, than he paid to be able to walk through the land. And we know he paid that because when he got back down to Egypt, he records what he did and how he deceived the Judean king. And, he comes out the victor from his perspective. But he did it by not trying to face the army. He knew he couldn't face the army. He had to use deceit. And he did so, and he influenced the land, and he puts a new king in charge. And he leaves, and he never comes back up to collect. Judah has to send down and take the king. You notice also the amount of tribute he demands was 100 talents of silver and a talent of gold. A generation before, the Assyrians had extracted from Josiah much larger tribute than that, and from Ahaz and Manasseh even larger levels. Necho realizes Judah doesn't have it. They have people and they have food, but they don't have hard currency. Because he has to tax everybody in the land to get that much. And it's a trivial amount compared with what they did the 2 generations before. The Assyrians have impoverished the land, and Necho knows that. And it's stretching Judah to get that much. They don't have anybody that's buying their agricultural produce. Egypt would be basically the only country near enough that might buy it. The Babylonians aren't going to travel that far for food yet. The Assyrians can't afford it. The Medes aren't going to travel that far for it. The Scythians are not going to travel that far, period. Libya can't get there. Ethiopia can't get there. The defeated nations north of Judah, Israel and all the other nations that aren't Assyria, can't afford it. They don't have it. They're poorer than the Judeans are. And they're just going to live with what they can grow. They're barely making an existence right now. Judah is the most prosperous country between Egypt and Babylon. In fact, between Egypt and Greece. And they just don't have it. That tells you the state of the world the Babylonians are going to come into. And why they so quickly conquer all the world. Because Judah is sitting on the breadbasket of that part of the world that's not in Egypt. They're the only ones that can feed their own army. They can't pay them a living wage to be professional soldiers. Neither can anybody else. There's a power vacuum based on economics. And the Babylonians have been trading all over the world, and they have been bringing stuff from outside the Middle East into the Middle East and trading. And they are the ones that have accumulated the silver and the gold. Nebuchadnezzar will make it about 10 times bigger than his father had it. And be phenomenally wealthy and powerful with his conquest. But he has the control of the economics. And he's paid a lot of gold out to the other countries around him that he ends up not conquering as trading partners. Because he does not have really a country that produces things. They're sitting in the middle of the trade routes and making trade and being the middleman to get their profit. And he's using that profit to pay for two things: to buy the food it takes to feed his people and to feed his army, and to pay his army. He's basically taking all of his GDP and the taxable part of it and using it to pay his army to be a professional standing army so he can conquer the world. And when he succeeds, then he gets wealthy. But right now, he's paying it out as fast as he can get it in. But the Babylonians are behind him to conquer the world. They have this goal, and they've taken his grandfather's idea to go conquer the world and be the next empire to heart, and he's succeeding. And he's the general that won, and he is the clear choice to be king. And he becomes that conquering king. Verse 31. Jehoahaz was 23 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem. I meant to go to verse 36. Jehoiakim was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 11 years. His mother's name was Zibadah, daughter of Pedaiah. She was from Rumah. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, just as his fathers had done. So he's following Manasseh and Ahaz, not Josiah. Notice he's 2 years older, so Josiah was 14 when he was born, and his mother's name was different. So he's a half-brother to his brother the Egyptians deposed. He's no better than his brother. He reigns 11 years. Chapter 24 is dealing with him. I think I'm going to stop here and we'll deal with that next week. I'll probably start back at verse 36 just to get a running start on him. But this is the beginning of the downfall of Judah. They get evil kings from this point forward. God, as we started, nevertheless, God did not turn away from the heat of his fierce anger which burned against Judah because of all that Manasseh had done. Josiah attempted, and because he did, he was a righteous king in an unrighteous country. And he got some superficial reforms, and it looked like the reforms were carrying on as long as he was alive. Now, his big thing from God was he was there to make sure that history went the way God wanted it to. And God needed him to be righteous to achieve that. He lost a lopsided battle, but he lost it in a lopsided way. He actually killed many more men than he lost. If he had not lost his life, he probably would have won that battle. He had an army bigger than a tenth the size of the Egyptian army. They killed more than 10 times the number of people that they lost. If he had been able to continue that battle, the Egyptians would have never gone up, and Pharaoh Necho would not have been, probably wouldn't have survived. The Egyptians would have been just wiped off the map by him. But God did not want that either. And he wanted Josiah's sons to reign. Holy Father, you are the director of world history, and you will use your people and insignificant people to do amazing things. At the time, it was not obvious how you were directing history and how important these little battles were. It looked like Judah was just run over, and in one sense they were. But you also wanted that. And you wanted evil kings that could not do what needed to be done in charge, so that your conquering army, the Babylonians, would do what they were to do. And they did. And because of that, world history is the way it is. Lord, you had them come home from the Battle of Carchemish with basically PTSD because of the carnage that was done there. Millions of men lost their lives on the battlefield, the largest loss of life until we get to the modern time. And it changed how they fought war. It changed how they administered. It made them realize that even when they conquered people, they needed to give them human rights. And they allowed the Jews to stay a people and to worship you. And they're in their captivity, you could purify your people to what they should have been in their own land, to let them come back from captivity and live for you until you could send your Son to dwell among them and show them the better way. And you knew it, and you knew exactly what it took to make it happen. And you did it. You are an awesome and almighty and powerful King of Kings and Lord of Lords. You always have been, you are now, and you always will be that King of Kings and Lord of Lords, that director of history. This earth is yours because you made it. You've never given it away. You've never sold it. And you will reign it again, even though it's been broken by sin. You promised to restore all things, including this broken creation. I look forward to that day, but I also know the troubles that will come upon the earth as you destroy evil and as heathen kings get to rule. Lord, we ask that you bring that to happen quickly so that we can see you reign quickly. In your holy name, amen. I am your host, Frank Reich, Associate Pastor of Family and Ministry at Grace Fellowship Baptist Church, and this has been the Wednesday evening Bible study for October 23rd, 2024. This was recorded on Saturday, October 19th, 2024. A personal note here, the pain in my hip returned last night. Tuesday night was the last night I took one medicine. Wednesday morning was the last time I took the other. I've not had any problems since then. And just sitting at my desk working on the computer last night, it started hurting. And I realized I was sitting in a bad position, moved back to proper sitting position, it went away. I did a lot of walking today, a little over 10 miles, and thoroughly enjoyed myself. It's been a nice, relaxing day. The pain has not come back. Continue to pray for me, though. Clearly, whatever is wrong was being masked by these medications. I need to not do the wrong things for it to not bother me. I don't know what that is. The doctor has not gotten back with me, and I've got to find all those records and call and say, why haven't you contacted me? What's going wrong? What's going on? How do I prevent problems? And I doubt they're open. We're open today or tomorrow. It'll have to be Monday. And work is really, really, really busy. I know what's going on this week, and I'm going to be extremely busy. So pray I'll have time to make that contact and ask the appropriate questions and get good answers. And get good answers for why it's been a month and I haven't been contacted. I don't think that's acceptable. And I need your prayers. I felt your prayers. I think everybody on staff has felt your prayers. We need them. Pray for us daily. I ask that. Have a blessed week. I hope to see you tomorrow morning in worship. If not, I hope you're there Wednesday evening for Bible study. If nothing else, we'll see you here on YouTube. Have a blessed week.